Silent Echo.
Hello, and welcome to Silent Echo. Before we begin, subscribe to the channel and like this video if you want more dark documentary investigations into real disappearances, cold cases, and unresolved stories that still refuse to give back their answers. The car was found first, not the driver. Not a witness who could explain what had happened. Just the car, a silver Nissan Altima, wrecked on a dark rural road outside Luling, Texas, with the lights still on and the keys still in the ignition. Inside were the pieces of a life that should have still been attached to the person who owned them. A phone, a wallet, school items, a laptop. Things a college student would never choose to abandon in the middle of the night on a cold gravel road. But Jason Landry was gone, not hiding in the vehicle, not standing near the crash, not walking toward the lights of the first responder who found the wreck, just gone. And then his father found something worse. Nearly 900 feet away from the crash site, scattered along the roadway, were Jason's clothes. His shirt, his shorts, his socks, his shoes, his watch, objects that did not explain where he had gone. They only made the absence feel larger. Because if Jason had walked away from that crash, he had walked into the Texas night without the things he needed most. Without his phone, without his wallet, without his shoes, without a clear direction anyone could follow. And that is the part of this case that has never settled. A young man left his college apartment for a drive home before winter break. His car was found broken beside a rural road. His belongings were found in and around the crash scene. Searchers came. Investigators came. His family came. And years later, the road still has not given Jason Landry back. To understand why this case feels so difficult, you have to begin with how ordinary it looked before it became impossible. December 13th, 2020, was not supposed to be a mysterious day. Jason Landry was 21 years old. He was a student at Texas State University in San Marcos. He had finished the semester and was entering the strange, quiet space that comes after finals when campus empties and the pressure of school suddenly breaks. For thousands of students, that week is familiar. Packing a room, answering messages, making plans, driving home, trying to cross the distance between one version of life and another. There is nothing unusual in that kind of departure. A student gets into a car. A family expects him eventually. Friends know he is on the move. The road is long but ordinary. But in Jason's case, the ordinary part did not last. He left San Marcos late at night in his silver 2003 Nissan Altima. The route should have taken him toward Missouri City, near Houston. A drive of several hours, but not a strange one. He had a navigation app. He had his phone. He had his belongings with him. He was not entering remote wilderness. He was not disappearing into a national park. He was moving between familiar points in Texas, through roads and towns that thousands of people travel through, without ever becoming part of a missing person file. But somewhere between San Marcos and the point where his car was found, the map changed. Not physically. The roads were still there. The towns were still there. The route still existed. But Jason's movement stopped matching the story it should have created. Instead of arriving home, he ended up on Salt Flat Road outside Luling, a rural gravel road, a dark stretch of country, an oil-field landscape of fences, trees, tanks, private land, and long distances between homes. It was not where the night was supposed to end, and yet, in the early morning hours of December 14th, that is where the car was found. The vehicle had crashed off the road. Investigators would later describe a single vehicle crash, consistent with losing control on gravel and overcorrecting. The car appeared to have spun and struck objects near the roadway, including a tree and a fence. There was damage. There was impact. There was enough to explain why the car stopped, but not enough to explain where Jason went. That distinction matters. A crash scene can explain the vehicle. It cannot automatically explain the person. In many cases, the body is found inside the car, or nearby, or injured beside the road, or walking toward help, or at least leaving a trail that searchers can follow. Here, the car told one part of the story. The rest of it opened into darkness. The first person known to have found the wreck was a volunteer firefighter passing through the area after midnight. He saw the vehicle on Salt Flat Road. He saw enough to call it in. The scene did not immediately look like a high-profile missing person case. It could have looked like a one-car accident where the driver had left. It could have looked like someone had fled the scene. It could have looked like a night that was strange, but not yet alarming in the way it would later become. That first impression would matter. Because in missing person cases, the earliest hours often shape everything. What is preserved? What is searched? What is treated as evidence? What is treated as ordinary debris? What becomes a clue? What is missed before anyone understands that it matters? Jason's car was eventually towed. Some items were documented. Some were left at the scene. Later, his father Kent Landry would arrive and record parts of what he found. He would see the road not as a crash scene in the abstract, but as the last known place connected to his son. And what he saw disturbed him, because the scene had not been sealed in the way a family might imagine when a person is gone. The car had been moved. Personal items remained outside. Questions about preservation began almost immediately. Those questions do not prove what happened to Jason, but they became part of why the case still troubles so many people. Because once the first hours are imperfect, every later answer feels less certain. The road keeps its secrets. The evidence becomes fragmented, and the family is left asking not only what happened in the dark before the car was found, but what might have been lost after it was. Jason Landry was not just a name in a missing person database. Before the case, before the road, before the scattered clothes, he was a son, a brother, a student, a young man in the middle of a life that had not yet become fixed. He had grown up in Missouri City, Texas. He was connected to his family, and his father, Kent, was a pastor. The family's public statements over the years have carried a mixture of grief, discipline, frustration, and faith. That combination is important, because cases like this are often reduced to the most sensational images: the car, the road, the clothes, the questions about drugs, the strange searches, the unexplained behavior. But every one of those details belonged to a real person, and if you lose sight of that, the case becomes easier to distort. Jason was 21. That age matters. It is old enough to make adult decisions, and young enough for those decisions to still be uncertain, old enough to leave campus late at night, and young enough for parents to still feel the shape of responsibility, even when their child is technically grown. He was in that narrow space between home and independence, between family and the private world of friends, apps, late-night calls, and personal decisions that parents may not fully know. That private world is one of the uncomfortable layers in this case. Investigators later discussed parts of Jason's digital life and search history. Some of those details were released publicly. His family questioned the purpose of releasing some of them, arguing that private searches and conversations can make almost anyone look strange when stripped from context and placed under the pressure of a disappearance. That is a fair caution. The internet records we leave behind are not clean biographies. They are fragments, curiosities, anxieties, questions typed in the dark, searches made without the expectation that one day investigators, reporters, and strangers will analyze them as if they are a map of the soul. In Jason's case, investigators believed some of those digital fragments may have mattered. They pointed to searches and conversations that suggested interest in wilderness survival, spiritual awakening, marijuana, and altered states. They also referenced a FaceTime call with a friend before Jason left his apartment, in which officials believed he appeared impaired. There was reportedly a screen recording of that call, but without audio, meaning investigators had to rely on other information to understand what was being discussed. The point here is not to turn Jason into a stereotype, not a reckless student, not a mystery defined by one possible substance, not a character in a cautionary tale. The point is that the known facts suggest he may not have been in a completely ordinary state when he began the drive. And if that is true, it matters, because the official explanation depends heavily on the idea that the disappearance after the crash may have been connected to impairment, disorientation, cold, and panic. But that explanation still has to answer the same central question. Where did he go? Not why might he have been vulnerable. Not why might he have made a wrong turn. Not why might the crash have happened. Those are important, but they do not close the case, because vulnerability is not the same as recovery. Disorientation is not the same as evidence. A plausible explanation is not the same as finding Jason. That is the tension at the heart of this case. The official theory may be rational. It may be the most likely framework, but it still ends in an empty field, a gravel road, a set of clothes, a car, and no body. The last normal hours before Jason vanished are difficult because they feel both familiar and strange. On one level, they are ordinary. A young man is leaving college at night. He is heading toward people he knows. He is using apps. He is communicating with a friend. He has items in his car that make sense for a student going home. On another level, the closer investigators looked, the more those hours seemed unstable. Jason was reportedly FaceTiming a friend about an hour before he left San Marcos. Investigators later said the friend recorded the call because Jason appeared so impaired that the friend worried he might not remember the conversation. Officials also stated that Jason was seen rolling marijuana blunts in the video and that similar items were later found near the crash scene. Again, that detail has to be handled carefully. Marijuana use does not explain a disappearance by itself. The presence of drugs does not erase a person's dignity. It does not make a missing person less worthy of search or care. But if someone is driving late at night, taking unfamiliar roads, using navigation, possibly impaired, and then crashes in a rural area during cold weather, those details can become part of the investigative picture. The trouble is that they can also become too dominant. Once a case is framed through impairment, there is a risk that everything else becomes easier to dismiss. A wrong turn becomes obvious. A crash becomes expected. A decision to walk away becomes assumed. And a missing person becomes a conclusion before the evidence has actually produced one. Jason left his apartment around late evening. Digital data later helped investigators reconstruct much of the trip. According to publicly reported summaries, he used Waze for navigation and then later opened Snapchat during the drive. That detail is critical because the night was not reconstructed only through witness memory. It was reconstructed through the digital residue of movement. Apps, location data, device activity, the quiet timestamps that modern life leaves behind. Those records showed Jason leaving San Marcos and moving through the route toward Luling. Investigators described the travel as consistent. The car did not appear to stop repeatedly in ways that suggested a meeting or a confrontation before the crash. Officials have said there was no known Luling connection, no evidence that Jason knew someone there, no clear reason for him to be interacting with anyone in that area. That matters because one of the most tempting explanations in cases like this is human interference. A second person, a meeting, a chase, a conflict, a stranger at the wrong place. Investigators have not found evidence to support that kind of scenario before the crash. But the crash itself created a new opening. If something happened after the car stopped, it would not necessarily show in the pre-crash digital data. That is why the case cannot be reduced to a simple route analysis. The known movement before the crash may look consistent. The unknown movement after the crash is the part that matters most. At some point, Jason deviated from the route he should have taken. The exact reason is still one of the major questions. He was near Luling. The road network there is not complicated in the way a city can be, but rural roads at night can become confusing quickly. A missed turn, a navigation error, a moment of distraction, a decision to continue straight. Any of these could put someone onto a road they did not intend to be on. Salt Flat Road was not the obvious way home. It was a rural road outside town. Dark, quiet, sparse. A place where a mistake can become larger because there are fewer lights, fewer people, fewer immediate ways to correct it. The road surface matters too. Gravel changes how a car behaves, especially at night, especially if the driver is tired, impaired, distracted, or simply not expecting the road to change beneath the tires. Investigators have said the crash likely involved an overcorrection. That is a very human kind of accident. A car drifts. A driver reacts too sharply. The wheels bite differently than expected. The road gives less control than pavement. The rear of the vehicle moves. Suddenly the event is no longer a drive. It is impact. It is noise. It is broken metal and darkness, and the shock of realizing that the night has changed. If Jason was inside that car when it crashed, the next moments matter more than almost anything else in the case. Was he injured? Was he confused? Was he frightened? Did he know where he was? Did he understand that his phone was still in the vehicle? Did he attempt to leave for help? Did he move toward lights, a sound, a fence line, a structure, a road? Or did something happen that no one has yet been able to reconstruct? The official view leans toward a post-crash explanation that does not require another person. A crash, a confused exit, clothing removed, a vulnerable walk into cold darkness. The environment then becomes the final actor. Cold, private land, oil field infrastructure, animals, water, thick vegetation, places a body might not be found quickly. But for the family and many observers, the problem is not whether that scenario is possible. The problem is that after years of searches, it has not produced Jason. And when the most likely explanation still leaves no recovery, doubt naturally grows in the space around it. The car was found on Salt Flat Road in the early morning hours. This is the image that defines the case. Not because it is the only evidence, but because it is the clearest one. A car that had obviously been through something. A vehicle out of place. A crash scene in the dark. Lights still on. Keys still in the ignition. A passenger door locked. A driver missing. The details are simple enough for anyone to understand. And that is why they are so haunting. When a car is found like that, the mind expects a person nearby. Injured perhaps. Disoriented perhaps. Dead perhaps. Dead, perhaps, but nearby. The car is the center of gravity. Everything should pull back to it. Instead, Jason was not there. His phone was still inside. His wallet was still part of the scene. The things that connect a person to help, identity, and survival were not with him. That is one of the reasons this case feels so impossible on first contact. A young man without his phone, without his wallet, without shoes, on a cold rural road, should become easier to find, not harder. He should be limited. He should not travel far. The search radius should shrink, not expand. The lack of survival tools should make the ending tragic, but traceable. Instead, the opposite happened. The fewer things Jason had with him, the more difficult it became to understand how he could vanish so completely. The clothing found down the road deepened the mystery. Officials later said the items were consistent with what Jason had been wearing when he left San Marcos. That matters because it suggests the clothes were not random belongings thrown from the car. They were part of his body's last confirmed presentation before the crash. They then appeared in the roadway away from the vehicle: a shirt, shorts, socks, underwear, shoes, a watch. The reported distance from the crash site to some of these items was roughly 900 feet. That distance is not far in a normal walk. But in this context, it is enormous. Because every foot raises questions. Was he walking away from the vehicle? Was he removing clothing as he moved? Was he injured? Was he experiencing confusion connected to cold or impairment? Was he trying to make himself more comfortable after a crash, in a state of panic that made no rational sense? Or were the items separated from him in some other way? Investigators have pointed toward the possibility that Jason removed the clothes himself. They have said there was no indication he removed them under threat or duress. The night was cold, with temperatures reported around the mid-30s. That brings in a known phenomenon often discussed in hypothermia cases called paradoxical undressing, where a severely cold person may remove clothing because of distorted perception. But even that possibility has limits. It can help explain why clothing might be removed. It does not explain where the person went afterward. It does not explain why he was never found. It does not explain why searches over time did not recover remains in the most likely areas. So the clothes do what so much evidence in this case does. They explain one thing while making another thing harder. The first official response was shaped by the information available at the time. A crashed vehicle, no driver, rural roadway, possible driver fled. These are things law enforcement sees. People crash and leave. People drive under the influence and walk away. People panic after accidents. At the earliest moment, the scene may not have looked like a disappearance that would still be unresolved years later. That is important because it helps explain why the first response may have been treated as a traffic incident before it became a missing person case. But it also sits at the heart of the family's frustration. Because if the initial assumption was wrong, then the cost of that assumption may have been enormous. Kent Landry arrived later and found himself in a situation no parent should ever face. He was trying to locate his son, trying to understand the scene, trying to communicate with law enforcement, and trying to make sense of objects that were still scattered in the road. He recorded video. He collected items. He documented what he could. The father became, in those hours, not only a grieving parent, but an accidental investigator. That is not how the system is supposed to work, but missing person cases often force families into that role. They become evidence keepers, search organizers, media advocates, pressure points, the people who remember details, because the world is already moving on. Kent later raised concerns about the scene. He questioned whether the vehicle and evidence were secured properly. He questioned whether early handling could affect any future prosecution if the case ever became criminal. Those concerns do not prove a crime, but they do reveal a central fracture in the case. The official investigation looked at the evidence and leaned toward an accident, followed by disorientation. The family looked at the same absence and saw too many holes. Both things can be true. A case can be most likely accidental and still poorly answered. A family can be right to question process even if the final explanation is not criminal. An investigation can pursue credible leads and still leave pain. The problem is that Jason is still missing. And when someone is still missing, every imperfection in the first hours grows heavier with time. The objects found near the scene deserve their own attention because they are the physical spine of the case. Inside and around the car were items that made the scene feel both ordinary and deeply wrong. A phone, a wallet, a laptop, gaming equipment, toiletries, a backpack, a tumbler containing a dead betta fish, a small amount of marijuana. These are not random objects. They create a portrait of a person in transit, a student moving between places, someone carrying parts of campus life back toward home. The betta fish, in particular, is one of those details that stays with people, not because it solves anything, but because it makes the scene painfully human. A person does not bring a fish on a long drive if he plans to vanish forever. A person does not pack ordinary belongings for a trip and then easily disappear into a cold rural road. The presence of the fish, the laptop, the toiletries, the everyday items pushes against the idea of a planned disappearance. It makes Jason feel like someone interrupted mid-transition, not someone staging a final exit. But again, the objects do not choose one theory completely. They can support the idea that he intended to go somewhere normal. They can also support the idea that after the crash, his behavior was no longer planned. The belongings tell us where Jason had been. They do not tell us where he went. The phone is especially important. In modern missing person cases, the phone is often the most powerful witness. It shows location. It shows calls. It shows app use. It shows final searches, final messages, final movement. Jason's phone remained with the vehicle. That cuts off the digital trail at exactly the point where it becomes most needed. Before the crash, digital records help reconstruct his route. After the crash, the main device that could have tracked him stayed behind. This creates a brutal divide. The life before the crash is increasingly traceable. The life after the crash becomes almost 19th century in its silence. No phone pings from his pocket, no call for help, no text, no step count, no map search, no digital cry into the dark. Just a body, if he walked away, moving through land that has not yet given him back. That is why the case feels so strange in the modern era. We expect technology to close gaps. Here, technology leads directly to the gap and then stops. There is another phrase, often attached to the case: the missing 67 minutes. Different summaries frame the timing in slightly different ways, but the idea is the same. There is a period between the last clear pieces of digital activity and the discovery of the crashed vehicle that remains deeply important. It is not an enormous amount of time, just over an hour. But in a missing person case, an hour can contain everything: a wrong turn, a crash, a decision, a walk, a meeting, a medical episode, a moment of panic, a death, a disappearance. If every minute were known, the case would likely look very different. But because the timeline becomes unclear, the mind keeps returning to it. Where was Jason during that gap? Was he already on Salt Flat Road? Did the crash happen soon after he left the route? Did he survive the crash for a meaningful period of time? Was he walking while the car had already been discovered? Could he have been visible somewhere if someone had looked in the right direction at the right moment? This is where the case becomes less about a single event and more about sequence. The order matters. If he crashed, removed his clothes, and wandered into the cold before anyone arrived, the search had to catch a moving target in a rural environment. If he was still nearby when the first responders saw the car, then the first response becomes even more critical. If he moved toward private property, oil tanks, water, brush, or a structure, then access and timing become essential. If another person encountered him after the crash, then the clean digital route before the crash does not exclude that possibility. The official position has not found evidence of another person causing his disappearance, but absence of evidence is not the same as emotional closure. That is the problem with the missing 67 minutes. They are short enough to feel knowable, and long enough to hide everything. The search that followed did not unfold as one single event. It became a long campaign across land, agencies, volunteers, family members, and years. Search teams looked through the area around Salt Flat Road. Volunteers returned again and again. The terrain itself became an adversary. Rural Caldwell County is not a clean search environment. It is private land, brush, oil field structures, fences, waterways, fields, places where access may depend on landowner permission, places where visibility changes with season, weather, and vegetation, places where animals can disturb or scatter remains. Officials have discussed difficult search possibilities, including oil, tanks, and animal activity. These ideas are not satisfying. They are not cinematic. They are grim and practical. They are part of the reality of searching for someone in a rural environment after time has passed. But again, they create a painful contradiction. If the explanation is natural or accidental, then the land must have hidden Jason unusually well. If the explanation is not natural, then the lack of evidence becomes another problem. Either way, the search has not produced the answer. Drones were used. Ground searches were organized. Specialized units reviewed evidence. The Texas Attorney General's Cold Case and Missing Persons Unit became involved after local authorities requested assistance. The OAG later said it had reviewed credible information, interviewed witnesses, consulted experts in digital forensics and accident reconstruction, and pursued geofence information near the area where the vehicle was found. By the third anniversary, officials said hundreds of investigative hours had been spent and that a roundtable review with experts had concluded that credible leads and investigative steps had been examined and pursued up to that point. That is a strong official statement. It means this is not a forgotten file sitting untouched in a drawer. It also means that the case has reached a difficult stage. When the obvious leads are exhausted, the remaining possibilities become narrower, stranger, or more dependent on chance. A new witness, a property search, a discovery in a field, a person who knows something, a piece of evidence that technology can finally interpret. Until then, the search continues in a pattern familiar to families of the missing. Hope action, silence. Hope again. Another search, another anniversary, another year without the answer. To understand why the official theory remains so powerful, you have to treat it with seriousness, not as an attempt to dismiss the mystery, not as a way to reduce Jason to a mistake, but as a reconstruction that tries to explain the most evidence with the fewest assumptions. The strongest explanation begins with the crash itself. Jason is driving late at night. He is on a road that is not part of the direct route home. The road is gravel. He loses control. The vehicle spins or leaves the roadway. It hits obstacles near the road. He exits the car. He is shocked, possibly impaired, possibly injured, possibly frightened. He does not take his phone. He does not take his wallet. He does not make a call. He moves away from the vehicle. At some point he removes clothing. He continues into the cold and darkness. And then, the land conceals what happened next. This explanation has real strength. It fits the car. It fits the lack of evidence of another vehicle before the crash. It fits the clothing in the road. It fits the phone being left behind. It fits the cold night. It fits the idea of confusion after a crash. It also fits something many families and viewers do not like to accept. People in crisis do not always behave in ways that make sense afterward. A person in shock does not think like a calm observer. A person who is cold, injured, intoxicated, panicked, or disoriented may do things that appear irrational when reconstructed later. They may walk away from safety. They may leave behind essential objects. They may remove clothes. They may hide. They may follow lights, fences, sounds, or instincts that lead them deeper into danger. This is one reason the official accident and exposure theory cannot simply be dismissed, because it sounds strange. Strange behavior after a traumatic event is not impossible. But a strong theory is not the same as a complete answer. This theory still has to explain why Jason was not recovered. It has to explain how a young man without shoes, without proper clothing, without phone or wallet, in cold conditions, could leave the road and become so difficult to find that years of effort would not locate him. It has to account for the fact that searches happened repeatedly. It has to account for how close the presumed area should have been if he was physically limited. It has to explain why the environment kept everything. That is where the theory becomes both plausible and frustrating. It gives a reason for the disappearance. It does not give a location. And in a missing person case, the location is the thing that matters most. The theory of hypothermia is often mentioned because of the clothing. Paradoxical undressing is a real phenomenon associated with severe cold exposure. People experiencing dangerous hypothermia may remove clothing due to distorted sensations and impaired judgment. The detail seems to match Jason's case at first glance. Cold night, clothing removed, person missing. But this explanation also has limits. For paradoxical undressing to happen, the person must reach a severe state of cold stress. That implies time exposed. It implies continued vulnerability. It may explain why clothes came off, but not how far the person traveled afterward. It may explain behavior, but not concealment. The clothing was found along a roadway, not deep in some remote ravine that pointed clearly to a final resting place. If Jason removed his clothes because of hypothermia, then he was likely already in severe trouble. The next question becomes whether he had enough time and ability to move far enough that searchers missed him. That is possible, but it is not proven. The theory of intoxication or drug effect is also part of the official framing. Investigators discussed marijuana and possible mental state before the drive. Early speculation included whether something consumed might have been laced, though later reporting indicated testing did not detect other substances in the marijuana. This is another area where discipline matters. It would be irresponsible to turn drug use into a complete explanation. It may be relevant. It may not be the decisive factor. It may have affected driving, judgment, or panic. But the evidence does not support a simple story where one substance explains everything that followed. The more honest view is that impairment, if present, may have been one layer in a chain of vulnerability. Late night, gravel road, wrong turn, crash, cold, confusion, no phone, no shoes, rural environment, no immediate coordinated search. Each layer alone may not be enough. Together, they form the official possibility, but the chain still breaks at the same point. Jason is not found, and that break is what keeps the case open in the public mind. Another explanation people consider is that Jason encountered someone after the crash. This theory has emotional force because it accounts for one of the hardest parts of the case: the lack of a body. If someone else picked him up, harmed him, concealed him, or moved him from the area, the failed searches become easier to understand. It also fits the vulnerability of the scene. A young man in distress, possibly disoriented, possibly underdressed, on a rural road at night, would be vulnerable to anyone who found him. But the theory has a major weakness. There is no publicly confirmed evidence that this happened. No identified suspect, no known meeting, no evidence from the route that Jason had a Luling connection, no confirmed witness placing him in another vehicle after the crash, no public forensic evidence indicating a violent confrontation at the car. The official review has not supported a criminal scenario based on known evidence. That does not mean a post-crash encounter is impossible. It means it remains speculative. The difference matters. A documentary can explore the possibility, but it cannot present it as the hidden truth. The question is not whether people can imagine a second person. The question is what evidence would place that second person there. At this point, the answer appears to be none that has been made public. Still, the theory persists because the case leaves so much room after the crash. The silence after the car is big enough for fear to enter, and once fear enters, it rarely leaves. There is also the question of whether Jason might have entered private property, a structure, a tank, water, or a hidden area. This is less a separate theory than an explanation for why he might not have been found. Rural industrial landscapes create search problems that open wilderness does not. There are places people do not easily access, places that require permission, places that may be hazardous, places where a body could be concealed by terrain, water, animals, machinery, or time. Officials have discussed the possibility that remains could have been affected by animals or that difficult structures in the area might require specialized searching. That kind of explanation is bleak, but it is grounded. It reminds us that the absence of a body does not always mean the body was moved by another person. Sometimes the environment is simply more complex than it appears from a map. Yet, even here, the case resists closure. If Jason entered a hidden location, why has no later inspection found him? If animals scattered remains, why has nothing conclusive surfaced? If he moved toward water, why no evidence? If he stayed close to the road, why no recovery? If he went far, how? Each answer creates another question, and that is why the case does not settle. It is not because no theory exists. It is because every theory has a missing final step. The voluntary disappearance theory is sometimes raised, but it is one of the weakest explanations. At first, any missing adult case can generate that possibility. Adults can leave. Adults can choose not to be found. Adults can abandon their lives, especially if they are under emotional pressure or in a state that others do not fully understand. But Jason's case does not fit a clean voluntary disappearance. He did not leave with cash, documents, a working plan, and an intact vehicle. He did not vanish quietly from campus. He did not take his phone. He did not take his wallet. He did not take shoes or clothes appropriate for survival. His car was wrecked. His belongings were scattered. The scene looked like crisis, not planning. Could someone in an altered state walk away and later avoid detection voluntarily? In a theoretical sense, anything is possible. But responsible analysis should weigh probability, not just possibility. And the evidence makes voluntary disappearance difficult to support. It requires Jason to choose an exit that was chaotic, dangerous, poorly supplied, and immediately preceded by a crash. There is no strong public evidence that he successfully began a new life. No confirmed sightings. No financial trail. No communication. No digital resurrection. That theory may appear in online discussions, but it does not carry the weight of the accident and exposure scenario. The more difficult possibility is not that Jason chose to disappear. It is that after the crash, he was no longer able to choose clearly at all. The question of the first search is one of the most painful parts of the case. When Jason's father arrived near dawn, he did not find a scene that made him feel his son had been urgently searched for through the night. He found confusion. He found distance between agencies. He found belongings. He found a road that had not yet become the massive search area it would later become. This is not unusual in the sense that many missing person cases begin with uncertainty, but it is devastating because of the conditions. If Jason walked away cold, injured, impaired, or disoriented, the first hours were everything. A person can survive cold for a time. A person can be found if searchers move quickly in the right direction. A person can respond to calls while still conscious. A person can leave signs before the environment destroys them. But if those first hours are treated as a driver fleeing a crash rather than a missing person in danger, the response changes. The urgency changes. The search perimeter changes. The preservation of evidence changes. Again, this does not prove that Jason could have been saved. It does not prove misconduct. It does not prove that a different response would have found him. But it creates an agonizing possibility. Maybe the critical window was lost before anyone knew it was critical. Families of the missing live inside those maybes. Maybe if someone searched sooner. Maybe if the car had not been moved. Maybe if the clothes had been treated differently. Maybe if someone had knocked on the right door. Maybe if the road had been walked in the right direction while it was still dark. Maybe if a dog had been brought immediately. Maybe if. That phrase is one of the cruelest things a missing person case can leave behind, because maybe is not evidence, but it is also not nothing. It is the shape of every unanswered possibility. The official investigation has had to balance those concerns with what evidence actually supports. The Texas Attorney General's office later became involved, reviewing information, interviewing witnesses, consulting experts, and supporting the broad conclusions already reached by local authorities. That does not mean the family received the emotional answer they needed. It means that from the perspective of the evidence known to investigators, the case did not point strongly toward a criminal explanation. For viewers, this may be unsatisfying, but it is important. A case can be unsolved without being suspicious in the way online speculation wants it to be. A person can vanish after an accident without there being a villain. A family can be right to be frustrated, even if investigators are right about the most likely theory. Truth is not always arranged into a clean conflict. Sometimes the conflict is between probability and proof. The probable event may be a crash, confusion, and exposure. The proof has not been recovered. That is the unresolved heart of Jason Landry's disappearance. Not a lack of theories, a lack of final evidence. The landscape around Luling became part of the investigation because it may hold the only answer left. Caldwell County roads can feel open when seen from above. Fields, brush, fence lines, service roads, oil field equipment, scattered homes. But openness can deceive. A person on foot at night does not experience the land like a drone camera does. He experiences it through cold, darkness, panic, pain, and confusion. A fence line can become a wall. A ditch can become a trap. A light can become a target. A sound can pull someone in the wrong direction. A person who is not thinking clearly may leave the road instead of following it. They may hide from rescuers instead of calling out. They may seek shelter in a place that becomes dangerous. They may move in a pattern that makes no sense to search planners. This is why search and rescue is so difficult. People in distress do not behave like dots on a rational map. They behave like frightened bodies under pressure. The official accident theory depends on this reality. Jason may have moved in a way no one could predict, but even irrational movement tends to leave a place, a final point, a body, a trace. The fact that none has been recovered is why the landscape remains both explanation and mystery. It may be the reason he is missing, or it may be the place where everyone has been looking while the true answer lies elsewhere. The case cannot tell us which. What makes this story especially haunting is the contrast between the violence of the crash and the quiet afterwards. A crash is loud, metal bends, glass breaks, tires tear at gravel, a vehicle strikes trees and fencing. There is force, there is motion, there is an event. But after that, the story becomes almost silent. No call, no confirmed shout for help, no clear witness, no definitive direction of travel, no recovered remains. The loudest part of the case is the only part everyone agrees happened. The silent part is everything after. That silence has allowed the case to live in many different forms. For investigators, it is a difficult, rural missing person case after a single vehicle crash. For the family, it is the unfinished loss of a son. For online communities, it is a puzzle of roads, timestamps, clothing, and theories. For search volunteers, it is a stretch of land that still might hold something. For viewers, it is one of those cases that feels like it should be solvable because the evidence seems close enough to touch. But closeness is deceptive. A phone found in a car does not mean the person is close. Clothes found in a road do not mean the path is clear. A wreck found in minutes does not mean the driver can be found in hours. That is the cruelty of this disappearance. It gives you enough to believe the answer should be near. Then it refuses to give you the answer. As the years have passed, Jason's case has become a lesson in how a disappearance can remain active even when movement stops. The vehicle stopped, the phone stopped, the route stopped, but the case did not stop. Every anniversary brings renewed attention. Every search returns the possibility that something was missed. Every new article reminds people that a young man still has not been found. The Texas Attorney General's cold case and missing persons unit continues to be the point of contact for credible information. Volunteer searchers continue to care. His family continues to carry the case in public, even as they confront the possibility that Jason may not be alive. That kind of endurance is not dramatic in the way television prefers. It is slower, heavier. It is parents learning to speak of hope and grief in the same sentence. It is a family offering a reward, not because money can fix anything, but because maybe someone will finally come forward. It is people walking through fields years later. Because the road still has not answered. It is the knowledge that a person can disappear in one night, but the people who love him will spend the rest of their lives inside that night. There are cases where the lack of evidence makes a story feel empty. Jason's case is different. It has evidence. A lot of it. That is what makes it so difficult. The evidence forms a frame, but leaves the center blank. The car, the route, the apps, the clothing, the backpack, the phone, the first response, the searches, the official review, the family concerns. All of it surrounds a single missing fact. Where is Jason Landry? Without that answer, every other detail keeps rotating around the void. If you believe the official theory, the void is a hidden body in difficult terrain. If you believe something else happened, the void is the missing evidence of another person. If you believe the early response failed him, the void is the lost window when he might have been found. If you believe the digital data holds the key, the void is the missing movement after the device went silent. Every interpretation begins with the same objects and ends in the same absence. That is why the case can be discussed for years without becoming clearer. The facts are stable. The conclusion is not. For a documentary, the challenge is not to make Jason's story stranger than it is. It is already strange. The challenge is to resist false certainty, to say what is known, to say what is likely, to say what remains unclear, to allow the official explanation to stand where it is strong, to allow the family's questions to stand where they are valid, to avoid turning a young man's most vulnerable private moments into spectacle, and to remember that at the center of every theory is someone who has not come home. The night of December 13th did not begin as a legend. It began as a drive. That is why it stays with people, because so many lives contain that same ordinary risk. A late departure, a quiet highway, a wrong turn, a crash on a road where help is not immediate. Most people survive those moments. Most people are found. Most stories become insurance claims, hospital visits, shaken phone calls, and family relief. Jason's did not. His story became a cold stretch of road near Luling, a set of belongings that should not have been separated from him, and a family forced to measure time by how long he has been gone. The case asks a question that feels simple and impossible at once. How far can someone go after a crash when everything they need to survive is left behind? And if the answer is not far, why has no one found him? That is the question Salt Flat Road still carries. There is another way to look at the case. Not through theories first, but through expectations. If a person crashes a car on a rural road and leaves the vehicle, what should happen next? There should be a path. There should be marks in the dirt. There should be movement towards something. A house, a light, a gate, a road, a direction that makes sense. If the person is injured, there should be a place where the injury limits him. If the person is cold, there should be a point where exposure overtakes him. If the person is confused, there should still be a physical body somewhere within the limits of what that confusion allowed. This is what makes the case stubborn. Every ordinary expectation has a reasonable answer, but the answers do not connect. Maybe he moved toward help, but no one confirmed helping him. Maybe he entered private land, but years of searches and attention have not produced him. Maybe animals scattered remains, but no conclusive evidence has appeared. Maybe he fell into a hidden location, but no location has been identified. Maybe someone encountered him, but no evidence has publicly established that encounter. Maybe the first search missed him, but later searches still did not find him. The case is not one contradiction. It is a chain of partial explanations that never become a final one. That is why viewers often return to the clothes. The clothing is the point where rational analysis and emotional reaction collide. It is possible to understand why investigators consider a self-removal scenario. It is also possible to understand why a family and the public look at that scene and feel something is deeply wrong. Clothes in the road are not like a phone in a car. They imply behavior. They imply movement. They imply a person acting in a way that is difficult to imagine from the safety of daylight. That makes them powerful evidence, but also dangerous evidence, because the mind wants to explain them quickly. It wants one answer: hypothermia, drugs, panic, threat, staging. But the truth may not be any single word. It may be a sequence. Jason could have been impaired before the crash. He could have been shocked by the crash. He could have been physically hurt in a way not obvious from the vehicle. He could have been frightened by the dark, by the impact, by the possibility of consequences, or by confusion itself. He could have removed clothing for reasons that were irrational, but internally urgent in that moment. He could have started walking. He could have lost orientation almost immediately. The human brain under stress is not a clean machine. It can take an ordinary road and make it unrecognizable. It can turn survival tools into forgotten objects. It can make cold feel like heat. It can make help feel like danger. This does not solve the case, but it reminds us that the strangest behavior is not always evidence of another person. Sometimes it is evidence of a person coming apart under pressure. Still, there is another side. If Jason was in that state, the search should have found him. That sentence is the reason the case will not leave people alone. If he was too impaired to take his phone, how did he evade every search? If he was too disoriented to keep his clothes, how did he travel beyond recoverable range? If he was injured, where did he fall? If he was exposed, where did exposure end? The official theory makes emotional sense only until the final step. Then the land becomes almost too efficient, too quiet, too complete, and that is where doubt returns. The private property issue matters more than many outside viewers understand. In a city, searchers can canvass blocks, request camera footage, follow sidewalks, check hospitals, and use dense human activity as an investigative net. In rural areas, the net has holes. Land is fenced. Access depends on permission. Brush can be thick. Structures may be unsafe. Animals move freely. Water and mud change evidence. Oil field equipment can create hazards. A search team may know where it wants to go and still not be able to enter immediately. That does not mean no one searched. It means the search environment itself was uneven. There may be places that were searched well, places searched later, places searched later, places never searched with the intensity the family would want, places changed by time before anyone could examine them properly. This is not an accusation. It is a reality of rural missing person work, and it helps explain why a person could disappear in a landscape that looks open on a map. But it also means certainty is hard to reach. When an area has not been searched perfectly, the accident theory cannot fully close. When no evidence of another person appears, the foul play theory cannot fully rise. The case hangs between an imperfect search environment and an incomplete evidence record. The phrase active and ongoing becomes both reassuring and painful. Reassuring because the file is not forgotten. Painful because ongoing means unresolved. Jason's family has had to watch the case become public property. News outlets summarize it. YouTube channels retell it. Forums analyze it. People who never knew Jason debate his last decisions. Some do it carefully, some do not. This is one of the hardest realities for families in unresolved cases. Public attention is necessary. It can generate leads. It can keep pressure on agencies. It can bring volunteers. It can prevent a missing person from becoming invisible. But public attention can also flatten a human being into the one worst night of his life. Jason becomes the student who crashed, the student whose clothes were found, the student with the strange searches, the student with marijuana in his backpack, the student who vanished. All of those things are connected to the case. None of them is the whole person. A good investigation must hold both, the facts of the disappearance and the dignity of the missing, the questions about his state that night, and the truth that he was loved, the official conclusions and the family's pain, the road and the life before the road. Without that balance, the story becomes either too clinical or too sensational. Silent Echo is not interested in either. The story matters because a real person is still missing. The mystery matters because the evidence does not yet return him. One of the most haunting elements is the normality of Jason's destination. He was not driving toward danger in the abstract. He was driving toward home or toward a familiar social circle near home. That is why the route feels so painful. The car was supposed to close distance between Jason and the people who knew him. Instead, every mile became part of the distance that separated them. San Marcos behind him, Missouri City ahead, Luling in between. Salt Flat Road as the place where the line broke. That geography is simple. And because it is simple, the break feels sharper. If Jason had been lost on a mountain trail, the terrain itself would feel like the answer. If he had disappeared at sea, the water would dominate the story. If he had vanished in a crowded city, human complexity would take over. But here, the setting is stripped down. A rural road, a crashed car, open land. The simplicity makes the absence louder. The case looks like it should be easy to explain. It is not. The timeline also resists emotional closure because it compresses so much into one night. There is no long period of uncertainty before the car is found. There is no week of unanswered phone calls before the first clue. The clue appears quickly. The vehicle is discovered within hours. That should be good. It should increase the chance of finding him. It should make the mystery smaller. Instead, it creates the opposite feeling. If the car was found that quickly, why was Jason not found with it? If the scene was identified that quickly, why did the trail not become clearer? If the belongings were there, why did the person vanish? The early discovery of the car is not comforting. It is what makes the failure to find him so difficult. Every hour after that first call feels like a door closing. By dawn, his father is searching. By daylight, the road is no longer just a road. It is a scene. By the time the case is fully understood as a disappearance, the night has already passed. And Jason, if he was alive after the crash, had already been alone in the cold for hours. There is no way to hear that without feeling the weight of the delay. The role of weather should not be underestimated. A recorded low around the mid-30s does not sound impossible to survive if you are dressed properly, dry, oriented, and close to help. But Jason may not have had those advantages. Cold becomes dangerous when clothing is removed. Cold becomes dangerous when a person is injured. Cold becomes dangerous when judgment is impaired. Cold becomes dangerous when a person is wet, sweating, frightened, or unable to find shelter. Cold becomes dangerous when no one knows where to look. In that sense, the night itself may have been a quiet weapon, not dramatic, not a blizzard, not a freezing wilderness expedition, just cold enough to turn confusion into danger, cold enough to make a bad decision irreversible, cold enough that a person walking without proper clothing could deteriorate quickly. This supports the exposure theory, but again, cold should leave an endpoint. A person who succumbs to exposure does not vanish from the earth. He becomes difficult to find, yes, but not impossible by definition. The unresolved question remains in the space between environmental plausibility and physical absence. The official investigation has repeatedly emphasized the lack of evidence pointing to a criminal event. That should be taken seriously. No responsible script should accuse unnamed people or suggest certainty where none exists. There is no public evidence of a known attacker, no confirmed chase, no established second vehicle, no known Luling contact, no forensic evidence released that proves violence. This matters, because in the absence of a body, suspicion can grow without limits. People imagine hidden motives, local secrets, cover-ups, unknown drivers, strangers. But imagination is not investigation. The responsible question is always the same. What fact supports this? In Jason's case, the strongest facts support the known crash and the likelihood that what happened afterward began there. That does not mean every official action was perfect. It does not mean every question is answered. It means the center of gravity is still the crash scene. The truth likely began on Salt Flat Road. The question is whether it ended there too. The family's concerns about the release of private information also reveal something important about modern missing person cases. Investigators may release details to generate leads, explain a theory, or counter speculation. Families may experience those releases as painful, humiliating, or unfair. Both sides may believe they are acting in the service of truth, but the missing person cannot speak for himself. That silence creates vulnerability even after disappearance. Jason's searches, conversations, and possible impairment became public because investigators believed they were relevant. His father publicly questioned whether those details created a distorted picture. This tension is not unique to Jason's case, but it is especially visible here. How much of a missing person's private life should become public? When does relevance become character damage? When does transparency become a second injury to the family? There is no easy answer. But the issue matters because the way a case is framed affects how people think about the missing person. If the public hears only about drugs and strange searches, they may assume the case is solved emotionally, even if it is not solved physically. If the public hears only about the abandoned car and scattered clothes, they may assume something sinister without evidence. The truth requires both restraint and honesty. Jason's mental and physical state may matter. The handling of the scene may matter. The absence of a body matters most of all. The search teams have faced a cruel kind of geography, a place close enough to revisit but difficult enough to resist. Over time, volunteers searched again and again. Some searches were organized by family advocates. Some were supported by agencies. Some focused on areas near the crash. Others responded to new ideas, possible access, or seasonal conditions. Each search carried the same hope. Maybe this time, maybe a bone, a shoe, a phone case, though the phone was known, a piece of fabric, a place that had been overlooked. Something small enough to have been missed but strong enough to change everything. Most searches end with nothing. That does not mean they are useless. Each one reduces uncertainty in a small way. Each one tells the family that people still care. Each one keeps pressure on the question, but each one also deepens the pain. Because searching without finding is its own kind of repetition. You go back to the place. You imagine him there. You scan the ground. You leave again without him. The road remains the road. The field remains the field. The family remains without an answer. Over years, that becomes a ritual of unresolved grief. One of the reasons the case continues to attract attention is that it contains a powerful visual contradiction. A wrecked car is final. It announces an event. It says something happened here, but a missing driver creates motion. It says someone went somewhere else. Those two signals collide. The car says stop. The disappearance says movement. Everything in the case is trapped between those two meanings. The keys in the ignition say interruption. The lights on say urgency. The phone inside says disconnection. The clothes in the roadway say vulnerability. The lack of blood in the car says uncertainty about injury. The rural land says concealment. The failed searches say not enough. The official review says likely no criminal evidence. The family says we still do not have him. This is why the case is so difficult to package honestly. It is not a simple mystery. It is a collision between evidence and absence. If a viewer wants a villain, the case does not provide one. If a viewer wants a clean accident, the case does not provide the body. If a viewer wants a planned disappearance, the evidence pushes back. If a viewer wants incompetence to explain everything, the later state-level review pushes back. The case lives in the middle, and the middle is uncomfortable. That discomfort is the reason people keep watching, reading, searching, and arguing. Because the human mind wants a missing person story to resolve into a category: accident, crime, runaway, exposure, mental health crisis, unknown. Jason's case keeps slipping from one category to another, never fully leaving any of them behind. A good documentary has to guide viewers through that discomfort without pretending to solve it. The first major truth is that Jason's crash was real. The second is that his absence is real. The third is that the strongest available explanation is not the same as proof. The fourth is that the early response left questions the family is right to ask. The fifth is that years of searching have not returned him. Those 5 truths can exist together. They do not cancel each other. They form the actual shape of the case. The problem with many retellings is that they choose one truth and make it the whole story. But Silent Echo has to hold the whole shape. The ordinary student, the strange final hours, the crash, the evidence, the family's concerns, the official theory, the search failures, the unresolved ending. Only then does the story become clear in the way an unresolved story can be clear, not solved, but honestly framed. There is a moment in cases like this when the viewer begins to feel that the evidence has become almost too intimate. A phone between a seat and console, a backpack in the roadway, clothes on gravel, a father arriving in darkness and daylight, a dead fish in a tumbler. These are not abstract clues. They are small, private objects, dragged into public tragedy. They make the missing person feel near. That nearness is why the absence hurts. Jason was not a distant figure moving through history. He was a modern college student whose life left behind the same kinds of objects many people carry: a phone, a backpack, a laptop, a car, a route home. It is easy to imagine, and that is the unease. If it can happen in such an ordinary frame, it feels closer. The case does not require a remote landscape to become frightening. It requires only a wrong road in the dark. That is why the opening image works. The car was found first, and in some ways, the car has never stopped being found. Every retelling returns to it. Every theory begins there. Every viewer sees it and expects the next sentence to explain where Jason was, but the next sentence never does. The car remains. Jason does not. By the 5th year, the case had become both old and not old. 5 years is long enough for public attention to fade, long enough for people who were children at the time to grow older, long enough for a family to endure multiple holidays without the missing person at the table, long enough for searches to become planned events rather than emergency responses. But 5 years is not long enough for a family to stop expecting the world to answer. It is not long enough for the road to become just a road again. It is not long enough for Jason to become a historical footnote. Recent coverage around the anniversary shows that the case still has life, not because there is a dramatic new answer, but because the lack of an answer remains intolerable. Volunteer groups still search. The family still asks. State investigators still serve as a point of contact. People still read the timeline and feel that something is missing. And they are right. Something is missing. The person, that sounds obvious, but it is the most important point. No theory should become so elaborate that it forgets the simplest fact. Jason Landry is missing. His family does not have him. The case is still open because the central evidence is still absent. The ending of this story has not been written by investigators, by online forums, by official statements, or by documentaries. It will be written by discovery. A person found, a credible witness, a physical trace, a piece of information that leads to Jason. Until then, the story remains suspended. One of the most respectful ways to think about the case is not to ask which theory is most exciting. It is to ask which theory best serves the evidence. The accident and exposure theory serves much of the evidence. It is likely the strongest grounded explanation, but it leaves Jason unfound. The human interference theory serves the fear created by the absence, but it lacks public evidence. The voluntary disappearance theory serves very little. It strains against the crash, the objects, the cold, and the lack of resources. The search failure theory may explain why he was not found early, but not necessarily why he has never been found. The rural concealment theory explains the difficulty of recovery, but not the exact path. When each theory is tested this way, the case becomes less sensational, but more powerful. It is not a puzzle where one hidden twist changes everything. It is a tragedy where each known fact brings you closer to the answer and then stops short. That is more haunting than a conspiracy, because it feels real, and it is real. The enduring question is not only what happened to Jason Landry, it is how much uncertainty a family can be forced to carry, how long a road can remain a wound, how many searches can end with empty hands before hope changes shape. At first, hope may mean finding him alive, then finding him injured but alive, then finding him at all, then finding enough to know. Eventually, hope becomes smaller, but not weaker. It becomes a prayer for truth, a location, a recovery, a return of what can still be returned. That is what Jason's family continues to seek, not a perfect answer. There may never be one, but a final one. An answer that ends the need to imagine every possibility. An answer that lets grief become grief instead of investigation. Until that day, Salt Flat Road remains part of the family's life. A place where the world split into before and after. Before, Jason was a student driving home. After, he was a missing person. Before, the car was transportation. After, it was evidence. Before, the road was just a road. After, it was the last confirmed place where the story still had a physical shape. The most painful cases are often not the ones with no clues. They are the ones with clues that lead almost to the answer. Jason's case leads almost there, to the car, to the clothes, to the phone, to the route, to the crash, to the cold. Then the path vanishes, not in a national park, not in deep wilderness, not at sea. On a rural Texas road, close enough to be searched, close enough to be revisited, close enough to feel solvable, and still no Jason. That is why the case endures, because the evidence feels like it should be enough, and it is not. If one day Jason is found, the meaning of the evidence may change immediately. The road may make sense. The direction may become clear. The theories may narrow. The family may finally have the answer that has been withheld for so long. But until then, the case remains in the space between the known and the missing. A drive that began late at night, a crash that stopped the car, a set of belongings that stayed behind, a young man who did not, and a question that still waits in the dark near Luling. Where did Jason Landry go after his car crashed on Salt Flat Road? There is one more layer that makes Jason Landry's case so difficult to leave alone. It is the way the case seems to offer two different stories at the same time. The first story is the practical one. A college student leaves late at night. He may be impaired. He gets off the intended route. He crashes on gravel. He exits the car in a state of confusion. He removes clothing. He disappears into a cold, rural environment. The search does not find him because rural land is harder to search than it looks. This story is grounded. It is plausible. It is the story that investigators have leaned toward because it uses the known evidence without requiring an unknown suspect. The second story is the emotional one. A young man's car is found with the lights on. His phone and wallet are still there. His clothes are found far from the crash. His father arrives and feels the scene has not been protected. No body is found. No clear path is found. No final location is found. Years pass. This story does not feel complete. It feels like something was missed. And both stories can occupy the same case. That is the uncomfortable truth. The practical story may be right. The emotional story may also be right when it says the case is not finished. Investigators can be correct that there is no known evidence of foul play. The family can be correct that without Jason, the answer is not enough. Those positions are not opposites. They are two different kinds of truth. One belongs to evidence. The other belongs to grief. This is why the case should not be handled like a simple internet mystery. It is not a game of choosing the darkest theory. It is a study in how ordinary risk becomes permanent absence. It is a reminder that not every mystery grows out of a hidden enemy. Some grow out of confusion, weather, timing, human error, bad luck, a missed turn, a delayed search, a landscape with too many places to disappear. If that is what happened to Jason, the story is not less tragic. It is more frightening in a different way, because it means that the line between a normal drive and an irreversible disappearance can be very thin, thin enough to cross without realizing it. Thin enough that a single decision, a single road, a single moment of panic can change everything. But if something else happened, then the case is frightening for another reason, because it means that the crash was not the end of the event, it was the opening. A moment that made Jason vulnerable to whatever or whoever came next. That possibility remains unproven, but it remains emotionally powerful because Jason was not recovered, and in missing person cases, non-recovery keeps doors open that evidence cannot always close. The danger is that viewers may mistake open doors for confirmed paths. That is why every theory must be held carefully. Could he have been picked up? Possibly. Is there public evidence that he was? Not enough to say so. Could he have died close to the crash site? Yes. Has he been found there? No. Could the scene handling have cost investigators information? Possibly. Does that prove the original theory is wrong? No. Could he have moved farther than expected? Perhaps. Can anyone explain exactly how? Not yet. The case is made of these measured answers. Possible, unproven, likely, incomplete, known, unknown. And that is the honest language of unresolved disappearance. Not certainty, not performance, not melodrama, just a careful walk along the edge of what the facts can actually hold. The most important evidence may still be out there in a form no one recognizes. A memory from someone who drove through the area that night. A property owner who noticed something unusual but never connected it to Jason. A hunter, a worker, a person who saw a light, a person who heard a sound, a person who thought they saw someone walking, but assumed it was not important. In rural cases, the missing piece is often not dramatic. It may be small. A truck turning around, a figure crossing a fence, an item seen in a ditch, a gate left open, something that did not seem worth reporting at the time. Years later, those memories fade. That is why keeping the case visible matters. Not because visibility solves a case by itself, but because it can reopen the mind of someone who was nearby. Someone who did not know they had a piece. Someone who has carried a detail without knowing where it belonged. The Landry family has lived for years with the hope that such a detail still exists. A detail that can turn uncertainty into location. Location into recovery. Recovery into mourning. Mourning into something less cruel than endless searching. That is the progression families want. Not fame, not speculation, not viral attention, just the chance to bring their person home. Jason's case also asks something of anyone who watches it. It asks for restraint. It is easy to look at the strange parts and make them bigger than they are. It is easy to turn private behavior into a verdict. It is easy to blame agencies without understanding the limits of the first response. It is easy to imagine a hidden crime without evidence. It is easy to accept the accident theory so completely that the family's concerns feel like inconvenience. None of those are enough. The truth likely lives in the full weight of the case. A young man in a vulnerable state, a late drive, a rural wrong turn, a crash. A response that began without full knowledge of what the night had become. A family forced into advocacy. A search environment that resisted certainty. An investigation that found no strong public evidence of foul play. And an absence that remains larger than every explanation. When seen this way, Jason Landry's disappearance becomes more than a single road mystery. It becomes a portrait of how quickly a life can fall through the gaps between systems, between traffic accident and missing person case, between private land and public search, between digital certainty and physical silence, between official probability and family need, between what probably happened and what can actually be proven. That is why the case still matters. Not because every detail is impossible, but because the final fact is still missing. The person himself. Until that changes, the story cannot close. It can only narrow around the same dark center, Salt Flat Road, the wrecked car, the clothes in the road, the phone left behind, the cold, the missing minutes, the years of searching, and the name that still waits for an answer. Jason Landry. If you have thoughts on Jason Landry's disappearance, share them in the comments with care and respect for the family and for what is actually known. Do you think the strongest explanation is a crash, confusion, and exposure? Do you think something happened after he walked away? Or do you think the key is still somewhere in those missing minutes, between the route and the wreck? If this investigation stayed with you, subscribe to Silent Echo, like this video, and stay with us for the next case.